Hello and welcome to DCS A10. In this video I'm going to look at the functionality and the use of the course deviation needle and the course deviation indicator, and I'm going to do it in 4 separate parts. First bit, we're going to do a bit of ground school on nav points and radials. Second part, we're going to take a practical example of the course deviation indicator in to from mode. Third part, we're going to look at the course deviation indicator in the to mode, and finally we look at the waypoint attributes page on the course on the CDU. Okay, we're just going to use this very basic graphic stage in order to demonstrate some of the basic principles of the intercept geometry associated with navigation points. We draw this navigation point onto the stage here, and we can see our navigation point has radials like a compass rose associated with it. The approach geometry for a navigation point will be determined by what radial we need to be on. And for instance, if this was a TACAN station, let's say it was Senaki, we would be approaching on the 270 radial, heading towards the nav point. And remember that the approach for Senaki would be on runway 09, so the radial is the reciprocal of the approach heading. Now let's draw a compass representation of our aircraft, and let's look at the geometry that we'd need to be on in order to be approaching that runway. We can see it would be something like this, and I'm just going to draw a line in. So we can see we're in this situation, we would be on the correct course and tracking in to Senaki on the 270 radial. So we have to mentally switch the radial to get the reciprocal of it to know what heading we should be on. So the heading is a reciprocal of the course radial. So in this case we can see that if our plane was on this orientation, we're actually heading down the correct line. What the course deviation indicator tries to do for us, it tries to measure how far we are away from this designated course line. And depending on how the CDI is set up, in the standard to from mode for the CDI, if we had our course indicator knob tuned in to 090, we would find that if we were off to the left, the course deviation indicator would be to the right. And if we were to the right, the course deviation indicator would be to the left, because the course deviation indicator tries to physically represent where the course is in relation to our aircraft. Let's look at some other geometry while we're here. I'm going to put this green dot represents our bearing point indicator, and in this case we can see if we're tuned into this navigation station or navigation point, a bearing point indicator will always point in the direction of that nav point. It's important to note that our aircraft may be in a number of different configurations, and for instance, if it was in this configuration, we would see that even though our bearing point indicator showed 090, our heading is actually 045. We're still on this course, our inbound course, but unfortunately we're not lined up. Our aircraft is not lined up for it, and very quickly we would traverse off that course because of the direction of travel. You can see as we traverse across, you can see that our course deviation indicator follows the nav point, and it follows it so that if we're heading in a clockwise fashion around our nav point, the course deviation indicator will fall down in a clockwise fashion also around the compass. This is useful to know because if we're intercepting this course, we need to be watching our bearing point indicator, as it gives us an indication as to when to turn. So if for instance we were intercepting from this location, we would see our bearing point indicator would be, in this case it would be close to the 90, and as we moved closer and closer to the course line, the bearing point indicator would get closer and closer to 90. So it's a good indication as to when we would need to turn. Also, in this case, if we had our course knob tuned in to the correct course. In this case it would be the 090 course. We would also find that the course deviation indicator line would start to move in as we got close, and that's also the reason why we use the course deviation indicator. Okay, let's go back to the pit. Okay, in order to demonstrate the to from mode, navigation mode, I'm currently going to set up for an approach to Batumi, and I know that the approach heading is 120, so I'm going to dial 120 onto our course setting knob, and we can see that by changing the course setting knob we're moving this arrow inside the compass, and this arrow is the course indicator line. I'm going to move the course indicator line until we're at 120. The other line we're interested in here is the line which is parallel to the course indicator, which is called the course deviation indicator, and that's the small section of line inside the compass rose. It will always be parallel to the course indicator, and if we're on the correct course, this line will move into the center of the course indicator. So currently we can see we're to the left of the course indicator, and that's because we're not heading towards the correct nav point. So we've got to tune in our TACAN channel to 16 for Batumi, and we're going to switch on to transmit receive mode. And now we can see we've got to also switch on to TACAN mode, and now we can see our bearing point needle points to our TACAN station. So we're now going to rotate a little bit to bring us in line, and we can see that's good. So we can see now that the course deviation indicator line is now very close to being in the center of the course indicator line, which suggests we should be on course. Understood that. So I'm going to demonstrate now what happens if we deviate from this course, and we're going to take a right turn. We're going to make a slight offset to the right. We're going to continue on a heading of 150 for a little bit, and let's watch what happens. The course deviation line, you can see it starts to track from right to left, and that suggests that we are now drifting off the correct course. Remember what we should be tracking in on. We should be tracking in on the 120 radial from the TACAN station at Batumi. So as we get further and further away from the correct course, the course deviation indicator will move further out. There's different scale settings depending on the mode, but the current en route mode shows that if we're at 2 dots away from center, we're 4 miles off the course. So the most important feature of the to from mode that distinguishes it from the other navigation modes for the CDI is that the deviation that we see here is determined by two things. It's determined by the navigation point that we've selected. In this case it's TACAN channel, and also the course heading which has been input using the course set dial. And we can see this by, if we move this dial, let's watch what the course deviation indicator does. We move it to the right, to the left, we can see that we get an alignment. We can see by looking at it here that if we were to turn onto this heading now, it would give us an alignment, but it wouldn't be on the right heading. So if we do it the other way, we can see we move it. So basically the course that we're setting for calculation of the course deviation is determined by the position of the course indicator on the compass. So we're going to wind it back around to 120 because this is where we want to be on the approach course. And we can see that that's a good distance to our left hand side. It's also important to note that if we want to intercept the course, if the course deviation indicator is to our left hand side, it means we're to the right of the correct course. So we need to be turning left in order to intercept it. So we're going to do that now. And remember, we have to turn further than the navigation bearing point 1 needle in order to intercept the course before we reach the navigation point. And the more acutely we make that turn, the quicker we intercept the course. The more quickly we're intercepting the course, the more difficult it is to turn back onto the course when we intercept the radial. So it's a combination of, it's a balance between not intercepting it too quickly and not allowing yourself the time to turn. So currently we're 27 miles away from Batumi. We can see it just off the outside the canopy rail there on our 2 o'clock position. And we can see that the course deviation indicator is now starting to track in towards the centre. Continue on this heading, and as soon as it gets close to our center position, we'll then start and take a right turn onto our bearing point needle. Now we're getting quite close, so we're going to start turning nice and slowly so that everything meets at the same time. A little bit more to go. Let it move a little bit more. That looks good, so we'll turn back onto our bearing point and level our ADI. Okay, so we can see we should be pretty well aligned to our course, and we're pointing in the direction of our nav point. So we can see our bearing point 1 needle, our course indicator and our course deviation indicator are all aligned. You can see that we're tracked a bit to the left of the runway, and this is because the TACAN station is not on the runway and it's somewhere in the vicinity of the airfield. So the TACAN would not be an accurate way of getting to an exact approach in poor weather conditions. For instance, the ILS would be more accurate because the ILS station is on the end of the runway. But I'm just using this to demonstrate the to from mode. And the most important feature, I'll just go through that again, is if we change our course setting here, we can see that our course deviation indicator is slaved to our course knob. Okay, we're going to talk about the 2-2 mode for course deviation indicator, and just going to talk a little bit first of all about what this means. There are a number of attributes associated with each waypoint or nav point, as we described earlier, and the attribute that we're interested in is the steer attribute, and it's probably easier to demonstrate what this is. Let's create quickly a new flight plan here. We're going to make us the player, and if we click on the waypoints properties for this flight, we can see we get a list of waypoint attributes. The attributes that we were looking at here are called a scale. Sorry, they're called a steer attribute, and you can see the default one when we create a new flight in our mission editor is the 2-2 mode. And when we show a drop down list here, we can see there are 4 options actually: to, from, direct, and 2-2, and none. We can see by default a new flight plan. For a new flight plan, all the waypoints are in the 2-2 mode. Just while we're on the waypoint attributes, what are called properties here, we can see there's another one here called scale, and essentially this scale determines how quickly or slowly that needle moves in relation to the distance. The course deviation needle moves in relation to the distance we are away from the current course. We can see there's a number of different ones here. The en route, for example, indicates that if we're in en route attribute for that waypoint or nav point, it means that 2 dots on the scale represents 4 miles. If we were in terminal, 2 dots would represent 1 mile, and if we were in approach, it actually works on the basis of the offset angle in relation to the nav point we're approaching. Essentially, if we were offset by 3 degrees, we would be seeing 2 dots, and that would be irrespective of how far or close we were to the nav point. Finally, there are 3 different ways that we can change these attributes. The first one we've seen here, we can change it in the mission editor. The second way we can do it is by going into the mission planner before we start the mission, and the third one is when we're in the pit, to select a waypoint within the flight plan, and we can change the attributes from there, and we'll look at that in the last section. Okay, here we are in the pit, and I've frozen this for a moment just to demonstrate where we are. We can see that on our TAD we're currently, our steer point is set to waypoint 0, and we're just going to have a look at the CTU page on the right hand side. We also see on the HSI that our course indicator needle has been set up for the correct course between our starting waypoint and our next, or our current, well, our next waypoint. It's important to note now the difference between the 2-2 and the 2-from steer attribute for our waypoint, and we're going to click on to waypoint 1. And in the 2-from mode, if you remember when we did our approach, by turning the course knob, we basically tuned in to the particular radial, and by tuning in to that radial, the calculation for the course deviation was done based on the course setting that we input here. So basically the course deviation was slaved to the course setting on the HSI. In the 2-2 mode it's quite different, in that the course is calculated by the computer based on the pre-programmed navigation points. So we can see the line between waypoint 0 and waypoint 1. That's the course that's programmed into our course deviation system by the computer when we're in the 2-2 mode. And the way we can demonstrate this is in our 2-from mode, when we turned our course setting knob, because we would have changed the radial that we wanted to approach on, and we would be further away from it as we moved it, the deviation needle would move to the left and right, the left or right. In this case you can see by rotating the needle, the course deviation, which is the piece in the middle indicator, stays fixed. So it doesn't matter what direction the course indicator is facing,
the deviation is always calculated based on these pre-programmed waypoints. It is good practice to align your course even though there's no calculation done based on the course indicator line. It's important to line up, just as good practice, line up the course setting with the current course. And the way we can find out the information as to what the direction of these lines are is by going onto the CDU page and selecting navigation and the attributes button over here, and we can see the information here is, it says dial HSI to 358.0. That's basically saying that when we're on this course between 0 and 1, in order to get our course indicator aligned, we should dial in 358 to the HSI, and you can see we're actually pretty much on the 358 position. If we were to move our waypoint, our steer point to waypoint 2, we can see that it requires us to dial in a completely different course. And once again we can see now this course is pretty much across that line here, and you can see we're quite a distance away from the course between 1 and 2, so that's why our deviation needle is full scale to the right. And once again, by turning the course knob, we can see it has no impact on the course deviation. So this remains at full scale no matter what we do. We can go right around the circle here and bring it back. It's also important to note that in order to get our course indicator to work correctly, we need to cycle correctly between two waypoints. We need to cycle to the first waypoint and then cycle on to the second one. So going backwards it doesn't work correctly. So if we want to now go back to seeing getting our course deviation indicator to work correctly between waypoint 0 and 1, we've got to go back to 0 and then forward to 1. It's important to note that. So I'm going to set our alignment and then I'm going to unfreeze. And I'm now going to show how our, it should have been 358, it's actually a little bit high, so just bring it down to 358. Yeah, that looks better. So I'm just going to show now how the course deviation indicator will move in the same way as we did in the last section. So I'm going to make a course adjustment to take us off the course, and we're going to just offset by 30 degrees. So now we're moving away from the course, and we can see that by looking at the TAD symbology, and we can see immediately our course deviation line is starting to drift. And once again, because it's on our left hand side, it means we're moving to the right of the course. So if I turn back on to the heading, the same heading that the course had, which is the 358, we can see it there, so, and it's also the same as our course indicator line there. If I moved on back onto that heading, not the bearing point heading because that will take us to the steer point, but move back onto that heading, now we can see we're travelling on a parallel course and we're slightly offset. And if we remember, the en route mode is 2 miles for 1 dot and 4 miles for 2 dots. We can see we're roughly 2 miles offset to the right of the course, and if we put our scale on this map we would see that. So I'm going to turn back again to intercept the course, and I'm going to switch the TAD off, and we'll turn it back on in a second when we set up our geometry. So the more acute the angle is in heading towards the course, the more quickly you'll intercept it. but it's important to note that once you start to intercept it, you need to turn back on the course very quickly, and so with practice you'll know what kind of an angle to choose to intercept a course. We're now getting very close, so there's very little, I've left very little between our bearing point and our course, and it means that we won't, and our heading, so we won't have to turn very much as soon as those needles align. So I'm just, that's properly aligned now, so I've just turned back and we'll level us on our ADI, and we can see that that should be a little bit offset there. That should be pretty good. So now we turn back on our TAD, we can see we're perfectly aligned on the course we need to be on. So that basically describes how the 2-2 mode works. Okay, we're now going to look at some of the CDU functionality and how we can change some of these attributes, the course deviation indicator attributes and the steer point attributes, from within the cockpit. So I'm going to first of all make some offset between our current course. Remember, by default we were in the 2-2 mode, so our course indicator has no relevance to our deviation, and as we can see, it makes no difference to where it is on the course deviation indicator. It stays fixed. So we can see we're moving off to the right. We're going to leave that back at 356 thereabouts. So we can see we're moving off to the right, and so our course deviation indicator is heading off to the left, as we would expect. And the place where we can change this in the flight plan mode, and the flight plan mode is selected by our steer point switch here. The place we can select to change our waypoint attributes in the flight plan mode is from the FPM page. So from the CDU we're going to, or from the UFC panel, we're going to change to the FPM page, and we can see we've got our flight plan, and there's only one there at the moment. It's flight plan MSN. We're going to select that by clicking on OSB 7, and now we can see we have our list of waypoints, and waypoint 1 is the one we're interested in, which is MSN 000, and I'm going to select this by clicking on OSB 9. And now we can see, and that's the name of the waypoint there, so we can see it's the correct one, and we can see that we have the options now to change some of the attributes that we were discussing. So we can, in the current mode we're in the 2-2, and we can change this. Before I change this, I'm going to turn back and bring our currently selected waypoint, or our steer point, to our 12 o'clock position, so we're heading directly towards that waypoint. I'm also going to turn our course indicator on to align with that, so that tells me pretty much exactly what the bearing is to our steer point, and we can see it's approximately 336, somewhere between 336 and 337. So that looks pretty good. So what the direct mode allows us to do is to set up our own course. And the course is set when we click on the direct button here. The course is set from our fixed position here, current position, to our steer point. And I'm going to do this now by clicking on the OSB 18 twice, and we're in direct mode now. So we've now set up our course between here and here, and we can see our current course heading is approximately 336, and if we look at the way the course deviation indicator works now, it's not slaved to the course knob, so it's very similar to the 2-2 mode. So I'm going to bring this back to 336 or 337 so we know what course we're on, and I'm going to move away from our course, and I'm going to take an offset to the right, and we should see our needle moving to the left, our course deviation indicator moving to the left, which suggests that we are now moving away from this course and we're moving to the right of it. And sure enough, we can see we're about a mile away from it. I'm going to turn back on in towards it. Remember, we have to turn back further left than our steer point in order to intercept the course before we meet our steer point. So I'm going to make a slight offset there, and we've got to watch our course deviation indicator once again as it starts to track back. Remember, this course is somewhere in this direction here, so you can see we're starting to track back in. And that looks like a good time to start turning. So we've turned on now, and that's back. We're back on course now. You can see we're back on the 336 course. So we've created that virtual course in space based on our position when we hit the direct button, which is somewhere behind us, and our current steer point. So in the same way we could switch from this, for this waypoint, we could switch to the 2-2 to from mode or the direct mode, or we can change some of the scaling factors here. So that's the way to change it while within the flight plan. There is another way. There are other ways to change the attributes for a waypoint, but not in the flight plan mode. We have to switch our left-hand AIP switch to our mission or mark mode, and we can see we're looking at waypoint 1, and we can now change the attributes by going on to the waypoint page. And we're going to click the function waypoint page. We're going to get back to our waypoint page, and we click OSB 7 to select the waypoint page, and we're very close to 1 now, so I'm going to cycle on to 2, and we're going to select 2 as our waypoint to change the attributes of. And you can see the first thing we've got to change is the waypoint number here. We've got to change to 2, so we enter 2 on the CDU and click OSB 19, and that will update us to waypoint 2. So we have 2 pages here, page 1 of 2 for this waypoint, and we're going to cycle down to the second page where we see our attributes, and we can change them from here. I'm going to turn on to our selected waypoint here, so we bring it to our 12 o'clock position, and once again I'm going to show that currently if we rotate our needle, we can say it doesn't. We can see at the moment we're in the to from mode here in this mode, and we can change it to the 2-2 mode, in which case the course deviation needle doesn't move. So the manual indicates that we can change in one of these modes, in either the mission mode or the mark mode, that we can change our flight plan attributes, but I haven't managed to find a way of doing that yet. But there should be enough here to enable you to do what you need to do and to get a good understanding of how the course deviation indicator is driven by the systems within the A10. I hope you found this video useful, and any comments are most welcome. Thank you for watching.